Nick Newman's hands quivered as the croaker's words echoed in his cognizance, each syllable pounding against his cranium like the risk of a death bell. Nick, Noah isn't your natural son. The sterile white walls of the sanitarium room seemed to close in on him, the beeping of observers fading into an unsupportable silence that screamed louder than any words could. His mind refused to reuse the statement, refused to let the treason of Gomorrah into the gist of his bones. It was insolvable. Noah, his boy, his flesh and blood, the child he'd held, assured, and loved through insomniac nights and scraped knees, not his? He felt a cold wave, a vicious twist in his gut, and a claw of fear gripping his casket as if the world itself had listed off its axis and every anchor of his life had been ripped down. His vision blurred, not just with the first hot sting of gashes he couldn't allow to fall, but with the furious chaotic curve of feelings that collided inside him. Unbounded and merciless shock, grief, rage, unbelief, and the uncontainable appetite to scream, to break commodity, anyone, everything in sight. He could feel the fire rising in his throat as he stumbled backward, his knees hanging to buckle beneath him, and yet some cruel, stubborn part of him demanded he stay upright, demanded he face the agony that had just been thrust into his world. "No, that's insolvable," he croaked, his voice coarse, cracking under the strain, echoing against the pristine walls like a death knell of stopgap. He turned toward Noah, who sat still on the sanitarium bed, innocent and unknowing, clinging to his father's hand with a trust that now felt like a cutter ringing in Nick's casket, and he could slightly attune the boy's familiar face with the horrifying verity that had just shattered the foundation of his life. Memories assaulted him like jagged shards of glass, Noah's first wave, first words, and horse laugh echoing through the Newman manse. Bedtime stories rumored in dimly lit apartments, birthday galettes with too numerous candles, and secrets participated in hushed tones, and every single one felt suddenly tainted, rewoven into a shade of falsehoods. His breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, and a pulsing rage erected into a nearly palpable air around him, a storm contained only by the frail veneer of civility that society demanded he maintain. How could this be?" he demanded, voice rising, cracking with the weight of his unbelief while the croaker shifted uncomfortably, doubtful how to soothe a man teetering on the cliff of deranged. The room felt lower with every twinkle, every shallow input of breath, and he wanted, demanded, to destroy commodity, to lash out, to make the world pay for the business that had been hidden from him. But there was no bone to condemn, no simple target for his agony, just the cruel, implacable fact that his son, the boy he'd loved unconditionally, was not the product of his blood, and maybe no way truly could be. The study burned a campfire of fury, and Nick's hands slammed against the nearest face, a charger of medical instruments rattling violently, rattling to the bottom, but the noise did nothing to sate the storm raging within. He felt betrayed not just by fate, but by time, by chance, by the macrocosm itself, as if it had orchestrated a perfect symphony of pain to mock him in the guise of verity. Memories of the woman who had carried Noah, the woman whose soft voice had called him daddy, whose hoarse laugh had intertwined with his own, rushed in, clashing with the scientific verdict, blending guilt with heartache, leaving Nick in a muddle where sense and emotion collided violently. His chest heaved, gashes surcharging the corners of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Crying would be rendition, and rendition was a conception Nick Newman couldn't attune with the explosion of rage and despair that now consumed him. "Noah, my son, my blood," he murmured, nearly incoherently, the words slightly escaping past the tight knot in his throat. His aspect danced back to the croaker, searching for some phenomenon, some misread map, some pastoral error that could undo this agony, but the croaker's solemn nod and precisely chosen words only banged the doors further. Nick's fists gripped, nails digging into triumphs, skin burning, blood pumping in a delirium that imaged the tempest in his soul, and the very air sounded heavy with the weight of his unbelief. Questions surged like a tidal surge. Who else? Who's my son? Who have I loved so blindly? What falsehoods have I been told? How could everyone let this be? How could I have been so eyeless? But no answer brought relief, only the sharp sting of treason that cut deeper than any blade. The world sounded cocked, each familiar corner of the sanitarium room writhing into grotesque shapes as Nick's mind entwined, the edges of reality blurring into a show of rage, grief, and despair. He wanted to scream, to shatter the walls, to make someone pay for this deception, Yet he also wanted to collapse into death, to sink into the unsupportable weight of loss, to vanish from a world that had betrayed him so completely. And through it all, Noah's innocent eyes met his, bright with unknowing trust, and that trust was both an altar and a dagger, cutting deeper because Nick knew he could no way look at the boy the same way again. His family, his musketeers, and the life he'd strictly erected around the idea of his son, it all sounded like a cruel vision, a mirage dissolving before his eyes. His lips buckled, a single ragged breath escaping, but it wasn't enough to release the tempest within. He staggered toward the window, pressed a hand against the cold glass, feeling the bite suck his skin, and for a moment, the cityscape beyond offered no comfort, no anchor, only the reflection of a man unraveling under the crushing weight of a verity he couldn't accept. Memories of his father, Victor, and the constant pressure of the Newman heritage surged into his mind, mingling with his own sense of failure and inadequacy, until Nick felt as though he were being crushed under the twin hammers of particular and domestic treason. He wanted to curse the welkin, to call down fire and wrath upon everyone who had let this be, to demand an explanation, a reckoning, a reason, but no words were sufficient. Every syllable he could muster sounded shy, trivial, and pointless against the enormity of the disclosure that had shattered his world. He felt as though he were trapped in an agony, one in which every moment of joy with Noah had been a taradiddle, a cruel prelude to this cataclysmic verity. His vision blurred, a blend of gashes and rage distorting the world around him, and he gripped his head, trying to contain the whirlwind of emotion hanging to consume him entirely. The weight of responsibility, the crushing guilt of love misdirected, the haunting specter of lost time and stolen moments. Every element combined into a suffocating haze that made it nearly impossible to breathe. And yet, indeed, amidst the chaos, a flicker of fierce, stubborn fidelity to the boy he'd raised, regardless of biology, burned within him, a complex admixture of defiance and despair, binding him to Noah in a way that neither wisdom nor dishonesty could ramify entirely. Nick's mind contended with an endless alluvion of questions, allegations, and recollections, each one further painful than the last, and as he turned back toward the bed where Noah sat still, the child's small hands clasped an innocent stopgap, Nick's laugh eventually tore free from his throat. Not a laugh of joy, not of relief, but of raw, primitive anguish that filled the sterile sanitarium room with the sound of a man undone, a father who had been forced to defy the unbelievable, a life ever changed in a single irrevocable moment. Every twinkle pounded in his cognizance like a barrel of war, every breath felt stolen, and every study circled endlessly around the one, horrifying verity. Their blood wasn't the same, and in that consummation lay a crack so deep, so irrecoverable, that it hovered to swallow him whole, leaving only the shattered remnants of a father scuffling with the cruelest twist fate could muster, caught between the love he'd known and the treason that had been revealed, a man on the edge of madness, gaping into the ocean of a life ever fractured. Nick could barely hear the world beyond the walls of the hospital room as the reality of the doctor's words continued to reverberate through his skull, each echo like a hammer pounding relentlessly against the fragile shell of sanity he had always thought unbreakable. He staggered back from the bed where Noah sat, so small, so trusting, so innocent, unaware of the storm that had just ripped through his father's life, and Nick's mind raced frantically, refusing to stop, refusing to make sense of a truth that felt too monstrous, too cruel, too impossible to bear, as if the universe had decided to play a joke so vile that no amount of reasoning could untangle it. And yet here it was, laid bare and undeniable. His son, his boy, the child he had loved, nurtured, and defended against the world, was not his, and the revelation struck him like lightning, leaving him momentarily paralyzed in disbelief. His hands shaking violently, a cold sweat slicking the back of his neck as every memory he had of Noah, the first steps, the scraped knees, the whispered confessions in the dark, the laughter echoing through the halls of the Newman mansion, suddenly felt tainted, rewoven into lies like a beautiful painting smudged by some invisible, merciless hand, and Nick's heart pounded in his chest as though it were trying to escape, as though it knew that the life he had built, the identity he had clung to, was dissolving into nothingness around him. And in that moment rage, grief, disbelief, and terror collided inside him like a nuclear explosion, an inferno of emotion that threatened to consume him whole, leaving nothing but a raw, quivering husk of a man, a father who had been unmade in a single devastating sentence, and he wanted to scream, to tear the world apart, to find someone, anyone, to hold accountable for this betrayal. Yet he also felt the hollow, sinking urge to collapse into the floor, to curl into himself and let the darkness swallow him completely. And the juxtaposition of his fury and despair was almost unbearable, almost too much for his body to contain, and still, he could not tear his eyes away from Noah, who continued to sit quietly, holding his hand with a faith and innocence that now felt like a blade twisting in Nick's gut, a cruel reminder of everything he had loved and everything he had lost in a heartbeat. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, to curse fate, to strike something, to make someone feel even a fraction of the torment that now coursed through his veins, but the words choked in his throat, each attempt to speak a jagged, broken sound, as if his voice itself were rebelling against the pain it could not articulate. And the room seemed to shrink around him, walls closing in, the sterile hospital smell suddenly suffocating, the beeping of machines like a mocking metronome counting the seconds of his unraveling sanity, and Nick's thoughts spun faster and faster, cycling through questions with no answers, accusations with no targets, memories now laced with venomous doubt. Who else has lied? How could this happen? What does it mean for everything I thought I knew? And the questions gave way to images of Victor, stern, unyielding, always demanding control and respect, and Nick could feel his father's shadow looming over him even here, weighing him down with expectation and legacy, and he imagined Victor's disappointment, the cold judgment, and the crushing weight of failing not just as a man, but as a Newman, and it made his chest tighten in a way that took his breath away. And yet, underneath the rage, underneath the anguish, a stubborn, relentless, unyielding love for Noah burned, confusing him, twisting him further, because biology could not erase the bond they shared, could not undo the years of laughter, sleepless nights, and whispered secrets, could not erase the boy who had taught him how to be gentle, patient, loving, even as Nick's mind tried desperately to reconcile that love with the betrayal of DNA, and the conflict tore at him like a living thing, gnawing at his soul, making his knees weak and his hands tremble, and he found himself pacing, circling the room like a predator trapped in a cage, his mind a cyclone of fury, despair, and disbelief, his vision blurred by tears he refused to shed because to cry would be to admit defeat, to allow the devastation to settle in fully, and Nick could not, would not allow that. Not yet, not now, not ever, and every fiber of his being screamed for action, demanded some kind of justice, some way to make the world right again, even as he realized there was no righting this wrong, no reversing the clock, no reclaiming what had been ripped away, and in that realization a new darker fire ignited within him, one that was not grief, not sorrow, not pure rage, but a tangled, chaotic fusion of all three, a maelstrom that threatened to consume everything in its path, including himself. He wanted to lash out, to destroy something, anyone, everything in sight, and yet, he could not bring himself to touch Noah, could not allow his hands to reach for the boy who was both his treasure and the epicenter of his torment, and the restraint, the impossible restraint, made the storm within even more violent, a pressure cooker of emotion with no release, and